Kingdom Come Deliverance II not only delivers an epic story, but also a fascinating look at medieval Bohemia in the 15th century. How much does the game stick to history? And what is the history of the locations and characters in the game? You will learn all this in this video. At the end of the video we also reveal the historical existence of the character Henry, so it is worth watching until the end. Warning, this video contains spoilers, but not spoilers about the story. Only spoilers in the form of mentioning locations and some characters, but not their actions and roles in the game. First, let's quickly talk about the historical context of the game. The game takes place in 1403 in the Kingdom of Bohemia, which was one of the most important parts of the Holy Roman Empire due to its economic power, for example, thanks to the silver from Kuttenberg, and the influence of Charles IV. Charles IV, known as the father of the country, was a beloved monarch. Under his rule, the country prospered and there was peace. After his death in 1378, his son Wenceslas IV took over, but he did not have his father's abilities. His inaction led to conflicts with the nobility. The nobility preferred Wenceslas' younger brother Sigismund of Luxembourg, also known as the Ginger Fox because of his ginger hair, who was more capable but also a ruthless military leader. In 1402, he captured Wenceslas IV and, with the help of his mercenary army, began to suppress resistance against him. The nobles who sided with Sigismund formed the League of Lords. On the other hand, the nobles who remained loyal to Wenceslas IV, such as Radzig Kobyla or Hanish of Lepa, formed the Bohemian Loyalists. This led to a civil war, which was the main precursor to the Hussite Wars. And it is during this difficult time that our story takes place. Now the history of locations from the area around Trosky. Trosky Castle. Trosky Castle is a castle ruin located in the Bohemian Paradise protected landscape area. This cultural monument is a symbol of Bohemian paradise and one of the most visited castles in the Czech Republic. The castle is characterized by two conical hills. The Baba cone is 502 meters high and the Punna cone is 511 meters high. The castle was founded in the 14th century. It played a significant role during the Hussite Wars, when it belonged to the lords of Burgov and, together with other castles in the area, formed a significant support for the Catholic side. At that time, the castle withstood two sieges and was only conquered in 1469 by the army of King George of Podbrady. From the second half of the 15th century, Trosky Castle ceased to serve as a noble residence. It belonged to the Kost Castle estate and later to Hruba Skala. In the last third of the 30 Years' War, the castle was alternately occupied and conquered by Swedish and imperial troops. After the war, it was no longer maintained, and gradually turned into a ruin. Troskowitz. The first mention of the village dates back to 1388. The population mainly lived on cattle breeding and agriculture. In 1883, there were 36 houses with 281 inhabitants. The village includes the settlements of Tachov, Javina, Krenovy, Nebakov and Semin. Then there is Trosky Castle and the rock town of Apollonia. Tachov. The first written mention of the village also dates back to 1388. Zelejov. The first written mention of the village dates back to 1300. Semid. The small settlement of Semin is home to the largest documented Celtic hill fort in the Czech Republic. Because of this, the Celtic Oppidum Semin has been standing here since 2018. It is a modern building stylized as a Celtic hill fort. Its appearance is intended to resemble the historical settlement of the area. The building is used for various exhibitions. Nebakov Fortress. Archaeological research has confirmed the foundation of the fortress at the end of the 13th century. At the end of the 15th century, the building probably burned down and in 1538, when it belonged to Roven, it is reported as deserted. The castle was protected primarily by the steep slope of the promontory into the valley. It was also protected by a moat. Right behind the moat stood a stone tower with a square ground plan, perhaps with a timbered superstructure. This was followed by a small courtyard and behind it another timbered building. The entire castle was then surrounded by a wall. Nothing has been preserved from the building until now. Before we continue to the area around Kuttenberg, if you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos about Kingdom Come. Kuttenberg. Kuttenberg was founded as a miners' settlement in the 13th century, when rich silver deposits were discovered here. During the 14th and 15th centuries, it became one of the most important cities of the Czech Kingdom and a major economic center thanks to silver mining. The Italian court, or coins, Prague groschen, were minted, was a symbol of this prosperity. The city also played an important role during the Hussite Wars. From the 16th century, Kuttenberg's importance began to decline due to the depletion of silver deposits. There are important monuments such as the Gothic Church of St. Barbara, a symbol of miners, and the unique ossuary and sedlist with decorations made of human bones. Today, Kuttenberg has 22,000 inhabitants and is listed on the UNESCO list, remaining one of the most impressive historical cities in the Czech Republic. Sedlist Monastery. The monastery used to be the oldest Cistercian abbey in the Czech Kingdom. It was founded in 1142 by the nobleman Miroslav. After the Hussites burned down, the convent church of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary and St. John the Baptist was preserved. Old Kutna. In 1260, the name of the settlement Antiqua Kutna, Old Kutna appears, which probably stood closer to the Sedlist monastery. The settlement probably disappeared during the wars of King Přemysl Otakar II with Rudolf of Habsburg, who in 1278 made peace with Otto of Brandenburg and Čáslav. Bylany. The first written mention of the village dates back to 1142. In the 13th century, there was a castle of Prince Miroslav, the founder of the Sedlist monastery. Between Bylany and Przitiki, a plentiful spring springs up, which in the Middle Ages supplied Kuttenberg with drinking water with the help of an aqueduct. A chapel dedicated to Saint Adalbert was built above the spring. Melešov. The name of the village is derived from the legend of a wealthy burgher Melešov from Kuttenberg, who founded a logging colony here. The settlers supplied the nearby silver mines with wood and charcoal from the mills. The first written historical mention of Melešov dates back to 1303. Melešov became particularly memorable during the Hussite Wars in 1424. At that time, Jan Žižka's army defeated the people of Prague and thus defended the idea of the Hussite Revolution for a long time. The architectural monuments in Melešov are dominated by the fortress, which was built at the end of the 14th century. The building acquired its current form in the 18th century, when the fortress was rebuilt into a granary. A 5-story tower with Gothic windows and a bricked-up entrance portal on the first floor, as well as the remains of the fortifications, have been preserved. The fortress served as a granary until 1980. Since then it has been dilapidated. In the years 2002 to 2017 it was reconstructed in a Gothic style. Wysoka. The first written mention of the village dates back to 1278. On the nearby hill Vysoka stands the Belvedere Summer Palace with the Chapel of St. John the Baptist from 1697. The building disappeared after a fire caused by a lightning strike on April 30, 1834. There is also a lookout tower on the hill. Miskowitz. The first written mention of the village dates back to 1131. There is a fortress here, the first written report of which is from 1419, when it belonged to a wealthy family from Kuttenberg. The fortress was probably abandoned at the end of the 15th century. Sukhadol. The first written mention of the village dates back to 1257, but its origins are undoubtedly much older. Przitiki. The first written mention of the village dates back to 1144, when certain property in the village belonged to the Olomouc bishopric. Grund. The first written mention dates back to 1305. Originally an agricultural village, after the founding of Kuttenberg it apparently became a place of intensive mining activity. Orchan. The first written mention dates back to 1299. Orchan has preserved the materially intact structure of a central Bohemian village from the 18th to 19th centuries, which is why a protected monument zone was declared here. Orchan is one of the most picturesque villages in the region. Devil's Den. In the 16th century there used to be only a lonely tavern called Zavadilka, where vagrants, thieves, and prostitutes met. The name comes from the fact that the original tavern, which stood on the site of the current village, was called Chertova Krchma, which translates to Devil's Tavern, because various vices were practiced there. Opatowitz. The village probably owes its foundation to the abbots of the nearby Sedlist monastery, who in the 13th century participated in the colonization of the inhospitable and hitherto sparsely populated region south of Kuttenberg. The first written mention of the village is from 1344 when it belonged to a wealthy burgher from Kuttenberg, Bohunowitz. The first written mention of the village dates back to 1325. In 1564, it is listed as part of the Raborš estate. Raborš. The first mention of Raborš dates back to 1115. The village was part of the property of the Benedictine monastery of Kladruby near Strybro. In the field south of Raborš, There once stood a hilltop fort inhabited from the Neolithic period to the early Middle Ages. And now let's talk about the history of some of the characters. Hans Capon, in Czech, Jan Tacek, was probably born in 1388, the underage son of Jan Ježek Tacek and Hedvika of Dauba. After the death of his father, his family, the lords of Lipa, his uncle Heinrich and his son Hanisch became his guardians. Young Lord did not take possession of Rattay until 1412. Soon afterwards he entered political life and he held positions in the provincial offices. After the imprisonment of Master Jan Hus he signed a petition in his defense, but during the Hussite Wars he was initially on the side of the League of Lords against the Hussites in a few minor battles. In 1419 he took part in a battle against the Hussites at Nin, apparently due to the influence of his close neighbor Lasek of Krabar of Sternberg. There are no records indicating he took part in the war later. His son was Heinrich Tacek, who achieved high office in the Kingdom of Bohemia, becoming Royal Hofmeister and Mince Master. Markvard von Olitz. He was the hetman or governor of Prague, who, much like those members of the nobility disgruntled with the reign of Wenceslas IV, saw in Sigismund of Luxembourg a better potential king. Their motivation had more to do with money and power. Wenceslas offered them no prospects, while supporting Sigismund promised them a better future position in society. He was the leader of an army from Prague that besieged Kuttenberg at the behest of Sigismund in 1402. His soldiers razed and pillaged much of the area around the town. Radzig Kobyla. Radzig Kobyla was a Bohemian yeoman, the royal hetman of Wenceslas IV and, between 1410 and 1415, Burgrave of Vyšehrad. In 1403 he resided at the castle in Silber Skalitz where he oversaw the mining of silver. The king was known for his generosity to lower nobles who received high titles for their loyalty. Radzig Kobyla was apparently one of these and probably the king's friend. In 1403 Skalitz was besieged and burned to the ground by King Sigismund and his Cuman army. For his service and loyalty King Wenceslas IV permitted Radzig to build his own castle at Vesely above Siso River. Standing on this site today is Chateau Komorny Hradec. He was killed in 1416 in a tavern in Kuttenberg by a mob of miners. Divish of Tomberg. Divish of Tomberg owned Tomberg Castle in the years 1390 to 1415. In 1391 the castle was conquered and Divish was taken captive and by his neighbor Hobbelmedek of Veldek, though we no longer know how the dispute arose between them. Due to the king's inability to settle the matter, Divish was imprisoned in his own castle for 7 long years while his young wife, Stephanie, attempted to raise the ransom to free him. Thanks to the help of friends, including Radzig Kobyla, he was finally liberated and Medek was condemned for his actions as a rebel. From 1400 onwards, Divish held the office of Prague Burgrave and in 1401 moved his seat to Prague. Meanwhile, Tomberg Castle was repaired and he gave it to his wife. Divish returned there in 1414, and in 1418 his son Ulrich governed the estate. According to some sources, Divish died in 1415, while others attest that in 1418. Margrave Jost of Moravia. Jost was presumably born in 1354 in the Moravian residence of Brno. He was Margrave of Moravia from 1375 and Elector of Brandenburg from 1388. He also held the throne of the King of the Romans, although he did so for a mere 15 weeks until his death in 1410 or 1411. He was the son of John Henry of Luxembourg and the nephew of Emperor Charles IV. He achieved his standing in Europe due to military and political intrigues, aimed primarily against members of his own dynasty, particularly Wenceslas IV, against whom he rebelled along with the Moravian forces in the so-called Margraviate Wars. He initially supported Sigismund of Luxembourg's efforts to seize the Bohemian crown, but in 1403 he began opposing him and together with Albert IV, Duke of Austria, took part in a rebellion against him. His previous support for Sigismund was probably motivated more by self-interest. It ensured him future influence as long as it seemed that Wenceslas would be deposed and Sigismund, or even Jost himself, would take his place. His campaign against Wenceslas won him and other nobles many privileges. Then, in 1402, when the situation changed, he rebelled against Sigismund and was even instrumental in liberating Wenceslas from captivity. We don't know whether the change was due to cunning or conscience, but to the end of his life he remained surprisingly loyal to Wenceslas IV. Towards the end of his life he even stood against Sigismund in the election of King of the Romans, and won. He didn't enjoy the crown for long though, and died shortly after. Jost was not only politically astute, but also a very thrifty governor. Many rulers, including Sigismund himself, were financially indebted to him. In his day, it was said that it was Jost, and not either Wenceslas or Sigismund, who was the true uncrowned sovereign of Bohemia. Hanush of Lepa. Following the death of Henry III of Perkstein, in 1402, Hanush of Lepa became the guardian of the former son Hans Capon and thus the acting governor of the surrounding province. He completed the construction of Perkstein and its fortifications and the local church of St. Matthew, which contains a shrine to his family. When Sigismund of Luxembourg invaded and burned Skalitz, the town's burgrave, Radzig Kobyla, and the survivors of the raid found refuge with Hanush. Hanush subsequently took action against scattered groups of brigands and cumans. His relationship with the king was peculiar to say the least. Judging by often contradictory sources, it appears that in 1410 crown forces descended on the town of Ratay in Hanush's domain, probably after he became a robber baron and rebel, who may also have participated in the siege of Jalava in Moravia. Nevertheless, in 1414 he became a provincial marshal and dwelt together with his wife Marketa of Sternberg at Spielberg in Brno. Wenceslas IV. Wenceslas IV was the son of Emperor Charles IV but lacked his father's ruling abilities. He was born in 1361. He became king of Bohemia and was elected as German king but was known as a weak and moody ruler. He preferred hunting, alcohol, and courtly pleasures over governance. His reign saw multiple conflicts, including disputes with his brother Sigismund and cousin Jost. The Margraviate Wars began when Wenceslas seized the Olomouc archdiocese estates, leading Moravian lords to rebel with Sigismund. His incompetence led to the loss of the imperial crown and later, control over Bohemia as he granted nobles increasing privileges. He was twice abducted, first in 1394 by Czech nobles and again in 1402 by Sigismund. Though he initially supported Jan Hus, he did nothing to save him from execution, which later fueled the Hussite Wars. Wenceslas died in 1419 before the wars began. His brother Sigismund claimed the Bohemian crown but had to fight for recognition and did not enjoy it for long. Sigismund of Luxembourg. Sigismund of Luxembourg, son of Charles IV, was king of Hungary and Croatia from 1387, king of Germany from 1411, king of Bohemia from 1419 and king of Italy from 1431. He was also Prince of Silesia, from 1419 Margrave of Lusatia and most notably Holy Roman Emperor between 1433 and 1437. He was born in 1368. At an early age, he was sent to be educated at the Hungarian court, quickly mastering the tough conditions of politics. Like other members of his family, he was abducted at least once, in his case by the Hungarian nobility. Having lost faith in the Hungarian nobility, he turned his attention to Bohemia and became engaged in hostilities with his half-brother, Wenceslas. Some of the Bohemian nobility welcomed Sigismund, hoping he would rid them of their ineffective monarch, while others sided with Wenceslas, resulting in long-lasting wars, in the course of which Sigismund and his Hungarian army, consisting in no small part of Cuman mercenaries, repeatedly pillaged Bohemia, often with the help of Bohemian and especially Moravian lords themselves. Sigismund fought not only to seize his brother's throne, but also against the Hussites with the aim of seizing the imperial crown. He regarded himself as the defender of Christianity and in 1409 even founded the Order of the Dragon to wage war against all enemies of the Christian faith. One of the later members of the order was the infamous Vlad the Impaler, inspiration for the fictional Dracula. After the death of Wenceslas, Sigismund brought to Bohemia 4 unsuccessful crusades against the Hussites. He died soon after the signing of the Compacts, a set of agreements with the reformers guaranteeing freedom of religious belief to every inhabitant of the lands of Bohemia and Moravia. Otto von Burgau. Otto III of Burgau was a Czech nobleman hailing from a family in Thuringia and Saxony. He was the Prague burgrave between 1388 and 1393, a member of the League of Lords from 1394. And in 1396 he became a member of the Royal Council of Wenceslas IV, although he later turned against him. He was the son of Albert of Burgau, who was appointed sub-chamberlain by Sigismund. He owned estates in Bila and Seeburg, as well as other properties, including a fortress on the river Sidlina and Trosky Castle. After Wenceslas IV regained the throne, Otto was punished and removed from office. His estates were inherited by 2 sons, John and Otto IV. Jan Žižka. Jan Žižka was a Czech Hussite commander, known as the father of the Hussite military doctrine and the creator of the wagon fort tactic. His life is primarily documented during its last 6 years, while little is known about his earlier years. In 1408, he declared hostility toward the Rosenberg family. After being pardoned by King Wenceslas IV, he served Polish King Władysław II Jagiello, possibly fighting against the Teutonic Knights. Later, he is believed to have encountered Jan Hus's preaching in Prague. In 1419, Žižka participated in the first defenestration of Prague, fought near Pilsen, and became one of the 4 commanders of Tabor. Despite complete blindness from 1421, he continued to lead Hussite armies successfully, defeating the Second Crusade. After breaking ties with the Taborites, he founded the new Tabor in eastern Bohemia and laid siege to Prague, resulting in peace negotiations. He died in 1424 near Přibyslav from an infection during a castle siege. Heinrich of Kunstad the Dry Devil. Heinrich of Kunstad, the Dry Devil, was a Moravian nobleman and robber knight who became infamous during the Margraviate Wars. He came from the noble house of Kunstad, and his father was Cosima II of Jevisovas. From 1390, he participated in conflicts in Moravia, plundering estates and attacking merchants, earning him the nickname Dry Devil. In 1401, he raided the Austrian castle of Wykirchlag and became the burgrave of Znojmo Castle. In 1404, he faced a siege of Znojmo by the armies of Albert IV of Austria and Sigismund of Luxembourg, but with the help of his allies, he repelled the attack. The besieging army was struck by dysentery, and both leaders fell seriously ill. Albert died. Heinrich continued his raids, which displeased King Wenceslas IV. After the death of Margrave Prokop, he lost his protection and was arrested in 1407 but soon released. Shortly afterward, he fell ill and died in early 1408. He left no heirs, and his estates passed to his nephew Jan, who inherited both his lands and the nickname Dry Devil. Henry III of Rosenborg. Henry III of Rosenborg, 1361–1412, was the son of Ulrich of Rosenborg and Elizabeth of Württemberg. After his father's death, he became the sole ruler of the Rosenborg domain, and under his rule, Czech Krumlov prospered. He served twice as the burgrave of Prague Castle, 1396–1398 and 1400–1403. As a member of the League of Lords, he participated in the capture of King Wenceslas IV in 1394 and 1402. After his death, he left behind 2 underage children, Ulrich and Catherine. Henry is unfortunately only a fictional character who is part of important historical events thanks to his story. However, there could have been someone who could have had a similar story but was not so important that anything about him has been preserved. Other game characters not mentioned here are fictional, but they may represent a group of people or be inspired by people who are known to have existed but whose identities are unknown. Kingdom Come Deliverance II not only delivers a thrilling story, but also provides a glimpse into one of the most fascinating chapters of Czech history. And what about Henry? Unfortunately, it is just a fiction, but his story reminds us of the lives of ordinary people in extraordinary times. Thanks for watching and don't forget to like or subscribe. If you have any questions about the history of the things mentioned, write them down in the comments and I will try to answer you. Bye.